Hey guys, Tomato Justice. I've got some old TDM footage because Battlefield is still being a little bit of a bitch and doesn't want me to connect to anything, so that's fun. And I've got some TDM footage where I was playing under a different name. You can change your name in Origin. I don't know if you guys know you can change your name, and I was playing under the name Sniper McScope. Because, you know, every once in a while you gotta be serious. And I wanted to talk about hardware news. There is some interesting video card news happening right now. Nvidia, if you are looking for a new video card, if you are looking to buy a new video card, if you're sick of your frame rate and you want to upgrade, do not, I repeat, do not do it in the next week. Okay, wait a week. You gotta wait a week. Because Nvidia is going to be releasing on the 23rd their new 780 GTX 780 video card. And a week later, on the 30th, they're going to be releasing the GTX 770 and possibly also the 760 Ti, though that may be even a week later after that. Anyway, these three cards are going to be pretty interesting, and they're going to totally shift the whole pricing models around, and we're likely to see a big change. Anyway, the 780 is based off the new GK110 GPU chip, and this is the same chip that is in the GeForce GTX Titan that was released back in March, I believe. And that was very interesting. They released the new GK110 versus the current GK104. Very interesting, much more powerful than one 690 GPU, which is the current most powerful GPU in the world or whatever, but it's two GPUs on one card, but this is just one GPU, and it's pretty darn powerful. It's much more powerful than anything else out there. But they priced it at $1,000. So it was more of a tech demo for 99% of the population than it was an actual product that you could buy, because who pays $1,000 for a video card? You know, unless you have $1,000 to drop on a video card. But the 780 is going to be released, and that's probably also going to be priced pretty darn expensively. The rumors, so take these with a grain of salt, the numbers that we have for rumors is probably $500 to $600, possibly even more, like $650. And that's a lot of money still, even though it's a cut-down version of the Titan chip, so it's likely going to be really, really good. It's still pretty prohibitively expensive for most people, but the 770 is going to be in the 360 to 450-ish range, I would assume. And that is interesting because the 770 and the 760 Ti that they are releasing is going to be based on the same GK104 chip. The same one that is in the current 680 and 670 and 660 Ti. So what they're going to do with that is pretty interesting. The 770, they have apparently redesigned the PCB on the card, so not the chip, but you know, the card that the chip resides on. They've changed a lot of stuff. They've increased the TDP, which is the amount of power it takes, to 250 watt versus about 200 watt, I think, on the 680. This is the 680 versus the new 770 that's coming out on the 30th. And they've raised the default voltage as well. So what I think is that they've probably increased the clock rate quite a bit, and also probably it's going to have a bit more overclocking headroom. Who knows? It's going to be pretty interesting. And, of course, what is more interesting is they're going to be dropping the price on it. So it's going to be released for what you can currently get a 670 for. So they're going to have to reduce the price on the 670 or something. So the 770 and 780, when they're released, are going to obviously reduce the price on the 680 and 670. And since the 680 is the current, is the same chip as the 770, perhaps you can get a 680 for cheaper after these are released. or these might just be worth it because they're going to be basically replacing the card in the same price bracket. So that's going to be interesting. And the 760 Ti is going to be around $200 to $300. And the 760 Ti is based on the same architecture that the current 670 is running on, the GK104. And I know that's pretty confusing, but that's the way it is. That's how they like to do it. They like to confuse us as much as they can so that we don't know what we're buying, and we hopefully accidentally buy something for more money. But yeah, so the 760 Ti is going to be released, and that's going to be pretty interesting as well because that could bring, way much more powerful 670 class performance down into the $200 range, which is going to shake up everything because AMD is going to have to respond with price cuts of their own, even though they don't have any cards to be releasing at this time. They're going to have to shift their prices around to match Nvidia's new cards. So all through the spectrum, things are going to be shifting around, and prices are going to be reduced, and new bundles and whatnot. What AMD has been doing in the past couple of months is they've been including like 3 or 4 AAA games with their cards, so you get like $120 worth of video games included with your $300 video card, so you sell those back on eBay and recoup some of the money or whatever. It's a pretty interesting value-added proposition because recently their cards at the mid to higher end are kind of losing out. Though the 7970, the 680 competitor, currently is on par with it, and that beats out at the top end there. But it's all pretty interesting, and what it means for the consumer is basically just wait 2 weeks and you stand to either save $100 to $200 or get a card that is the same price that you were looking at 2 weeks ago, but it's 25-35% faster. So it's just worth it to wait 2 weeks, in my opinion. If you absolutely can't wait, it's not like you're not getting a great card for your money or whatever, but at the moment, it's probably a good idea to wait a couple of weeks if you're in the market for a new video card. I also wanted to talk about, last time I did a hardware video, I talked about Intel's Ivy Bridge processors, the upcoming Intel Haswell processors, and how overclocking is going to work with those. And what I said was Ivy Bridge, unlike Sandy Bridge, the previous generation, did not have a fluxless solder between the internal heat spreader and the CPU die. And what people were doing was removing the internal heat spreader, replacing the cheap thermal paste that Intel used with high-quality thermal paste, and they were getting good performance improvements. They were getting temperature drops by up to 20 C. So that's pretty darn good. And what this guy figured out over at AnandTech, and I'm going to link this thread, and I suggest you read it if you're at all interested in this sort of thing, was that the change was less due to changing the actual thermal paste from Intel's cheap thermal paste to a higher quality one. That had less to do with the temperature improvements than the actual gap, the 0.16 millimeter gap that existed between the internal heat spreader and the actual PCB, the actual green chip on the CPU. That this gap was creating basically a gap internally between the thermal paste and the internal heat spreader, was stretching it out, creating a bleed out, a pump out over time with the thermal paste, and that gap, that air between the actual heat spreader and the die was causing a lot of thermal problems. And modders, without knowing it, because it's a 0.16 millimeter gap, modders, without knowing it, they remove the die, they remove that gap when they put the die back. They remove the internal heat spreader, and then when they put the heat spreader back on the die, they've actually removed the gap between the two, and that's responsible for more of a thermal improvement than the other one. So that's what this guy figured out through a painstakingly long process that he did, and he logs every single piece of data that he did. He tests tons of different thermal pastes, and he comes to this conclusion over the course of it's just like a few months this thread takes place. It's a very long and very detailed thread, but it's just super interesting to very slowly figure out that, it's not actually the thermal paste, it's the gap between the... It just blew my mind. I thought it was really, really interesting. And I correct myself. I thought that it was mostly due to the, cheap thermal paste. But it's the gap. And that would also explain the fact that the fluxless solder used in Sandy Bridge was, eliminating the problem of the gap, because the fluxless solder is, near as makes no difference direct die contact, because it's solder. It's metal anyway. So that was just pretty interesting, and I thought I would share that. I'd put that link in the description there. And the Haswell processors are coming out this summer. I wouldn't necessarily say hold off on those. It's going to be like another month probably until we see those things showing up in the wild for you to buy, and especially ones that are not the 4770K, which is going to be the new flagship on the Haswell processors. It's just like, from what I've seen, they're only going to be 5 to 7, probably 5 to 10% performance improvement, which is like, if you're looking to buy a computer, that's like not anything to worry about. And the new features that are on the motherboards for the Haswell processors are really nothing all that new. Sort of better BIOSes where you can, I think Gigabyte was showing off a BIOS that had different like profiles you could flash, and there's more integrated USB 3.0 ports on the motherboards. The new Haswell processors have things like that that are just really not all that interesting and not all that big a deal. They're not that big of a deal. So if you're looking to buy a new CPU, going with Ivy Bridge at this point is probably still fine, especially if you're getting a quad-core version, and I wouldn't sweat it. But it is going to be interesting to see how Haswell is going to overclock. And we haven't really gotten any more information about that yet, but that is coming closer. So that'll be very interesting to see. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. I don't know if you noticed, it was just funny halfway through this. I was using the G53 at the time to unlock the new skin, because this was around when Endgame was coming out or something like that. And it was like about halfway through, I get shot by this M16 guy, and I'm just like, all right, gotta go for that F2000. Gotta go for it. All right, thanks a lot for watching, guys. I will see y'all later.
Later.